Hello and welcome. I'm going to be talking about how to integrate the shadow, what integration means, also what the whole self means, what the shadow means, and give some examples as far as what could be coming up within the unconscious self that will need integration and need some observation to understand the relationship with our unconscious fears, what's lurking beneath the surface, and our shadow, and how to differentiate what we can work through, allow for time for integration, what that means, and then discover more wholeness within ourselves. And this does lead us into the stage, into the process towards self-actualization, and then of course also transcendence. So I'm going to be covering what the shadow is, what integration is, what the whole self is, and what this whole process of self-actualization and moving into a state of transcendence is. This is part of the awakening process. When we are able to understand our unconscious self and our shadow, that is going to be an integral part of the process of returning into a state of self-actualization, a state of transcendence, and this state of awakening. Now, awakening is when we are seeing more of ourself. I know there's a big buzzword going on in the spiritual community around awakening, which is part of the process. And I do feel because our spiritual selves have been so suppressed for a long time, centuries, we are returning more to this aspect of ourself. But that's only one aspect of ourself. We have our mental aspect, our psychology, we have our physical aspect, we have our emotional aspect. And right at the center of it all is our unconscious, or I would say a very strong component of it all, a very influential component is our unconscious, and thus, of course, our shadow. And when we understand this component of ourself, we will be able to awaken more. We will be able to see more of ourself. If we are looking at the spiritual awakening in the spiritual sense, then we are going to miss our ability to open up other avenues for understanding ourself. So the awakening process isn't only to do with spirituality. That's only one part of it. The awakening process is understanding our whole self, opening up greater levels of consciousness. And by going into the unconscious and by going into your shadow, you will awaken more. So like I said, the spiritual aspect of ourself is becoming very prevalent. We are exploring this. It's a time of a spiritual awakening, but again, that is only one part of our whole. It is an essential part of our whole, and I hope that we all can go through it and experience it, but we can't forget this other aspect of ourself, which is equally as important. And truthfully, it's all tied together. It's all connected. When we understand our spiritual self, we can also move into our mental self. We can cultivate greater awareness within our psychological patterns, within our mental patterns. We can also look at our emotional self, tune into our heart. We can also connect more with our body, our physical aspect. And then, like I said, at the very origin, the connector to all of this is our unconscious. And once we understand the unconscious and go into the shadow, then we will be able to again gain a greater sense of wholeness and self-actualization, moving us into a state of transcendence. The greater awareness that we cultivate within ourselves will also allow us to see our ego more, will also allow us to see our fears more and feel how the fears are manifesting within our body, within our physical self, and how our fears are playing into our behavioral patterns. We will see more of ourselves, be able to catch more of these patterns, and be able to not only heal, but move through these difficulties within ourselves with more awareness and more compassion. And again, when we see more of ourselves, we will move quicker through these difficult times. We all face difficulties. And this is part of the integration process. The integration process is when we are able to see these aspects of ourselves, when we can recognize our fears, when we can recognize our pain, when we can recognize our grief, our anger, and sit with it and understand the true origin of where it's coming from, remembering that everything that we go through in our life, the people who are showing up in our life, the situations that are showing up in our life, are all actors on our stage. They're all showing us something. When they trigger a deeper aspect within ourselves, they are triggering something for us for it to be seen within our unconscious, for us to turn our gaze inward rather than pointing the finger outward towards people and towards situations, rather sitting with it and feeling with it within ourselves, of understanding the origin, but also understanding the mechanisms within ourselves that are connected within our inner workings, meaning again, our mental patterns, what's coming up in our mind, what is showing up in our body, how is it interrupting our behaviors and the like. And when we shine light on our shadow aspect within our unconscious self, these unseen aspects, we see ourselves more. So the process of integration allows us to illuminate more within ourselves. And over time, we begin to walk through these phases, these layers, if you will, more and more and more with greater self-awareness. And thus, of course, arriving at more peace and wholeness within. So like I said, this will lead us to a state of self-actualization. It will lead us to a state of advanced consciousness, according to Carl Jung, transcendence, whatever you want to call it. It all takes us to that same place, right? And the issue with shadow work and the deterrent from facing our inner fears and facing the discomfort is the confusion and the actual unconscious mechanism of avoidance or detachment when we are going through a difficult time. For example, I'll give a few examples of what could show up in your life that's quite common, that may create a bit of a barrier from going through it. And I will walk you also how to go through it and to integrate some of these aspects. But before I go into the examples, let's go into more of the direct meanings of integrating the shadow. So integrating the shadow is a concept that was introduced by Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, and refers to the process of recognizing, accepting, and incorporating the unconscious aspects of the self that we often repress or deny. These aspects, known as the shadow, include traits, impulses, or desires that are deemed socially undesirable, taboo, or unacceptable, leading individuals to suppress them. However, the shadow is a natural part of the psyche. It represents the parts of ourselves that we might not fully be aware of, or we might prefer not to acknowledge. So as I mentioned, the shadow is an uncomfortable part of ourselves. And in modern society, we have been literally taught not to act out a certain way, not to feel certain ways, not to express certain ways. And we have suppressed so much of ourselves. And this is a time right now that we can grab hold of what we've suppressed and slowly start to bring it into our conscious level of awareness for integration. Now, we can naturally want to suppress these feelings and these discomforts within ourselves. And this is just a byproduct of our unconscious makeup and our belief patterns, where we may feel that it's bad to feel certain ways, that it's uncomfortable, therefore we shouldn't feel that way. And so our unconscious self can almost take over some of the ways that we almost react to these discomforts or to these situations that we might encounter, such as fear, or such as lack or grief or anger or resentment. But when we see these aspects of ourselves and deeply reflect inward, we will be able to understand more about ourselves, and we will be able to navigate, and I will explain in a moment, these deeper, darker aspects of ourselves so that we can integrate it, so that we can see them. And once we integrate it, we begin the process of letting them go. They become seen, therefore they move into the conscious level of awareness. And that's where they begin to basically release, but also move into a greater state of self-actualization, as I mentioned. So integrating the shadow means acknowledging the hidden aspects. So in order to integrate, it involves becoming conscious of the hidden or repressed parts of our personality, such as anger, jealousy, fear, or even positive traits that we might not value or recognize within ourselves. These are the qualities that we tend to avoid because they don't align with our conscious self-image or societal expectations. Integration doesn't mean accepting these shadow traits in an uncritical or unexamined way. Instead, it means recognizing them as valid parts of who we are, accepting them, and allowing them to inform our growth. By doing this, we stop projecting these traits onto others or repressing them, and we become more whole, balanced individuals. When we see our patterns and when we recognize what's happening within ourselves, when we become more self-aware and when we turn our gaze inward, understanding our shadows, understanding some of these more difficult aspects of ourselves, we can also break patterns. Now, I talk about this often. This is one of the greatest exercises. Once you grasp this, you will be able to alter your reality. You'll be able to heal your body. You'll be able to transform your life experience, all of it, because these patterns are ingrained deep within our unconscious self and have almost a life of their own in many ways. And when we can understand our patterns, when we can see them, when we can reflect on them, when we can be an observer in our reality, we will begin to break those patterns and form new constructive ways for creation, for manifestation, for life enjoyment, for peace, for flow, for alignment with who we truly are. So integrating the shadow also means taking the power away from these unconscious traits that may control us. For example, instead of being overwhelmed by unacknowledged anger, we learn how to express it constructively. The shadow, when acknowledged, loses its unconscious control and becomes a source of personal power and insight. Shadow integration is also key for personal development. By accessing and learning the shadow, we expand our self-awareness, making us more attuned to our motivations, desires, and reactions. This leads to a deeper understanding of ourselves and more authentic living. And Jung believed that the process of integrating the shadow helps achieve a healthier, more balanced psyche as we stop denying parts of ourselves. By doing so, we can break free from rigid patterns and unhealthy behaviors, ultimately leading to greater emotional and psychological freedom. So this process of integration allows us to be more whole. It allows us to be more free. It allows us to be more self-aware, which is liberating. It allows us to understand ourselves with greater compassion, thus, of course, being able to see others with a greater level of compassion as well. And even more so, it will take us into a greater state of awakening. This is a process, I feel, of whole awakening, not just spiritual awakening. It's awakening our consciousness. This takes us to a whole level of being. As I mentioned, the spiritual awakening that's happening right now in the world is beautiful and it's necessary and it's needed, but we cannot forget this aspect of ourself and that there's more to ourselves than just the one aspect of self. The spiritual aspect is part of our whole being when you think of our soul being, our spirit being, but there are other aspects of ourselves that are equally as important. And when we master these 4 quadrants of the spiritual, of the mental, the psychological, the emotional, the heart, and the body, then we will become more whole, we will become more balanced, and we will be able to manifest even greater than ever before, but find a greater understanding of self and move into this greater state of awakening, wholeness, and self-actualization. And then, of course, as the Maslow's hierarchy of needs takes us straight into the mode of transcendence. I want to talk about going through. So going through and going into the shadow, not bypassing it or suppressing it. Now, we by nature don't like to feel pain or hurt or even feel fear or these uncomfortable aspects, because when they come up, they become very profound. They almost overtake our emotional state of being. They can overtake many aspects of ourselves, leave us feeling almost completely maybe taken off guard or thrown off balance, or just feeling a lot of discomfort that we can't necessarily make sense of. When these feelings and sensations come in, it is very common for us to just naturally not want it to be part of ourselves anymore. So we can bypass, we can detach, we can disassociate, we can go right into positivity and positive affirmations and spiritual alignment, which is good. And I'm not discounting the spiritual aspect. I hope you understand where I'm going with this. It is learning to lean into it, and as uncomfortable as it is, to learn to sit with it and find comfort in the discomfort. I know it's a little bit uncomfortable. However, in order for us to truly feel and regain that sense of connection with ourselves and integrate and go deeper within and identify some of these patterns and these origins, we have to go into it. We have to walk right through it and right into it to understand what it is. What is it really showing within ourself? How is it manifesting within our body? How is it manifesting within our emotions? How is it even shifting our perception on reality, which it does? And once we start to see these patterns within ourselves and start to understand the origin within our unconscious and understand our shadow and the relationship with these false beliefs, we will be able to open our perspective, our perception more. We will be able to, of course, create this ripple effect in our life of very positive outcomes. So we have to walk through this. We have to sit with it. For example, if there is a fear of punishment, say we don't want to open our emails, we don't want to read a text from someone, we don't want to maybe even put ourselves out there, maybe even deal with family matters in a way of being true to our heart and showing up in our authentic true self, we may create a lot of anxiety, or a lot of anxiety will be created within ourselves. We may feel afraid of approaching certain situations. We might be afraid of opening our phone or opening our email or speaking with someone. We may lessen ourselves. We may avoid it altogether. We may completely shove or suppress that situation down, to not face it because it's foreign. We might not know how to work with fear. And again, this is just the byproduct of societal conditioning, where we do have now this moment where we can understand these more deeper aspects within ourselves. So there are stages that you can go through when you are facing maybe a fear of punishment or a fear of ridicule or judgment from others. This also can lead to fear of worst case outcomes. So this family pattern, maybe from the past, could have been from a very unpredictable family pattern. Maybe there was a lot of anger and inconsistent behavior that had been embedded within the unconscious, leading a person to believe that this is a repeated pattern. And also we can create these patterns based on our past experiences, recreating the patterns in our current timeline or our current lifetime, and unconsciously not feel comfortable with it, but still unconsciously put ourselves in these patterns and in these situations. And it can get to the point where we want to shut life out altogether and not engage with people, shut people out, not answer our emails, and it creates a lot of tension within ourselves. And then we get caught in this hamster wheel, a little bit of a loop within this particular experience. So how to stop this and break the loop and break the pattern is by sitting with it and going through it, rather than suppressing it, and rather for opting out for maybe positivity, affirmations. You can incorporate affirmations, breath work, meditation, all these things. And I do talk about it often, but in this particular case, I want to single out going through the shadow, going through these emotional difficulties, going through these psychological patterns and these beliefs and these thoughts that are coming through. Because once we understand where they're really coming from and we can connect with them on a deeper level, we will allow for this integration to take place, therefore moving us through this level that we have within ourselves, or this layer, into greater wholeness and peace within ourselves. So as I mentioned, if there is this fear, say, for example, you don't want to open an email from someone, or you don't want to open up a text message from someone, or you don't want to deal with family matters. I mean, boundaries are fine, but if there's a fear under the surface, that needs to be seen. And gently go through it, gently go into it. And maybe there is a bit of distrust under the surface there. So you can incorporate more trust, but by first understanding the pattern and how it's manifesting in your life. How is it stopping you? How is it preventing you from having flow? How is it preventing you from showing up in your heart or showing up fully? How is it preventing you from speaking your voice, or maybe even approaching a situation with more compassion and kindness? And again, that trust factor, I feel, is going to be very, very substantial. I feel a lot of us have lost trust with the universe on a very, very deep, deep, deep level. So you can incorporate the feeling of trust in that moment. How does it feel to breathe through it and trust it? Maybe reversing some of the false beliefs of fear of the worst case outcomes, and step by step, allow yourself to go through it. Allow yourself to face it, allow yourself to see it, and allow yourself maybe to break some patterns. Is there resistance and holding back from communicating with people? Is there a new way of integrating a mode or a method of communication with other people in maybe a more gentle way, maybe a more compassionate way, maybe opening your heart a little bit more, maybe being a bit more confident within yourself? And again, really incorporating that sensation and that feeling of trust that everything is going to be okay. And by trusting yourself and the universe, the process, and other people, you will be able to cultivate meaningful experiences and rich experiences, and also alter maybe even some other people's patterns that they might find themselves in. Another example could be fear of failure. If we are afraid of failing, we might not put ourselves out there. We might be holding ourselves back. We might even hold life back. We might not want to try again. We might be very risk adverse. We might be avoiding some opportunities that could be waiting for us in the future or in the present moment. So again, by understanding these patterns and going into these fears, for example, or worry or lack or scarcity, or maybe even resentment or anger towards some of these experiences, we will be able to break some of these patterns. So if you're finding yourself in a fear of failure, this also could be fear of the future or fear of even success in some cases. Go through it and see what patterns are showing up. Is there self-sabotage? Is there, again, not wanting to take risk or even trying something new and daring, stepping out of your comfort zone, opening your heart, being vulnerable, starting a new business, whatever, however it lands for you, however it resonates? How can you take actionable steps to maybe identify some of these patterns and look into the fear, and then work on changing the patterns within yourself and incorporating a true belief or an affirmation of, I am excited about the future. The future is limitless and I'm stepping into my full abilities and capabilities. And by incorporating this more within yourself, you're going to also be able to counteract some of the false beliefs that have been created, but you're also going to be able to see what really has been holding you back and maybe why. The last example I want to give is fear of rejection. This can go very deep. This can also include fear of abandonment, where we can tend to reject the world, perhaps, or relationships before we get rejected. We could also have a rejection of self. We could keep people at bay. We can push people away. We also might hold on very tightly in fear of rejection as well. So if this is resonating with you, if there's a pattern of that, go into it and lean into it. And this is about compassion. It's about curiosity. It's about self-exploration and being really gentle with yourself and not being hard on yourself for feeling this way. I always have to preface this. We are here to do this work, to observe ourselves through the lens of compassion and curiosity so that we can understand ourselves more. And it's a simple process of understanding that we have patterns within ourselves. And once we see them, once we understand them, once we feel them, we can work on letting them go. And so this process of integration is, again, allowing for us to see more of ourselves. And sometimes we may activate a trigger by looking inward. It may create discomfort. We may get sad. We may get angry, and that's okay. That is a part of this process as well, where there may be a bit of an emotional reaction or a trigger that might be a response as to going deeper within ourselves. But when you have that, again, it's a perfect opportunity to be with yourself, feel it, allow for it to happen, find a healthy outlet, whatever that may mean for you, and allow for yourself to process it. The more you understand about yourself, you're going to have greater senses. You're going to have, as I mentioned, a shift in consciousness. You're going to heal your body. You're going to heal the past and remove these patterns. And you're going to have a greater sense of self-awareness. And this takes time. It takes time to really go deeper and to understand these layers within and to identify these patterns. But in the regard to the fear of rejection or maybe abandonment, this can come in very unconsciously in ways that we interact with relationships and also ourselves. We can hold life at bay. We can push people away. We can hold on to life and become very, very dependent on people and on life as well, therefore lessening our confidence within ourselves. As I mentioned, it's simple awareness and step by step by observing within self where this could be coming into one's life and in what kind of pattern. You can work backward to see, where did this pattern originate? Maybe there was a family pattern, maybe there was a situation from the past that happened that is still ingrained within the unconscious self, where you can shine light on it, move it into the conscious level of awareness, and allow for it to be integrated and then to move to a state of release and wholeness. So if you feel this nudge to shove someone aside or not let love in, or maybe even fear of worst case outcomes as well, or even holding on really tightly, work through it, see it, feel it, sense it. Allow yourself to go into maybe a new feeling and sensation that you haven't felt before. The unconscious self will automatically want to, or the subconscious self even, will automatically want to not go there. It automatically will want to shut it down and avoid it altogether because it's uncomfortable. These uncomfortable feelings are we naturally avoid them. We naturally shove them aside because they are not comfortable. But the uncomfortableness comes from something that has not been resolved. And if we don't resolve this, it will keep coming up. It will persist. It will show up in many other ways. Like I said, your body is your final communication warning center. It can show up and manifest in the body eventually, not to create fear out there, but that's how it works. And so what we don't see will persist. It will still be there in some shape or form. So with regards to fear of rejection or fear of abandonment, this also can allow you to strengthen acceptance, self-acceptance, the connection within your heart, loving yourself fully, feeling full within yourself. And again, seeing the patterns of how it has been manifesting in your life, how it's been transpiring within your life, and maybe where it originated from. Try to go back and connect the patterns to the past that will allow you to see the patterns of today. So this is how basically integration works. It allows us to see ourselves more. When we see ourselves more, we may go through a process of change. We may go through a process of even some difficulties within ourselves, but that is our body, our unconscious self, our subconscious, our conscious, all starting to align, all starting to work together, because we are opening up the doorway to our unconscious self, moving it up into our conscious level of awareness. And yes, it has to go through our emotions. It has to go through our mental state. It has to go through our body. So the more observant you can be, the greater you will allow for this process to take shape, to take form, to transmute. So allow for this to find its way naturally. This is an ongoing process. It does take time to find its way, but the more you can walk through and into your shadow and into some of the more difficult moments, you will become more whole. You will see more of yourself, and this will lead to a greater awakening. This will lead to greater self-awareness and wholeness and confidence within yourself. It truly is also a process of liberation. All right, so I hope this offered you a little bit more guidance on your path forward. And you can also find me on Substack, where I'm creating more content over there as well. The link is going to be in the description box below. I look forward to seeing you again, and take care.